There's a particular kind of tiredness that comes with opening your rental app on a Sunday night. Not dramatic tiredness, just that slow, familiar weight that sits somewhere between your chest and your stomach when you see the numbers again. You already knew what they'd say. You looked last week and the week before, but you check anyway, like somehow the figures might have quietly rearranged themselves into something livable. They haven't. The Sydney and Melbourne rental markets in 2026 are doing something that feels almost personal. Rents haven't just climbed. They've restructured the whole emotional landscape of what it means to live somewhere. A one-bedroom in an inner suburb that felt aspirational 3 years ago now feels like a negotiation with your own sense of dignity. And the strange part is how normalized it's all become. People mention it at work in the same tone they use to talk about traffic. Flat out expensive. Has been for a while now. But underneath the resignation, something else is happening. Quietly. In the background of all those Sunday night scrolls and share house conversations and nervous calculations on the Notes app. People are starting to ask a different kind of question. Not just, can I afford this, but what am I actually building here? And that second question, the one most of us push away because it feels too big for a Tuesday, that one's worth sitting with for a bit. Renting used to carry a certain lightness. You weren't tied down. You could move cities, change jobs, follow something. There was freedom in the transience, or at least that's what you told yourself when the lease renewed and the rent went up 4%, and you signed it anyway because the alternative was 3 months of inspections and application forms and the particular humiliation of writing a cover letter for a 2-bedroom in Footscray. That lightness has mostly evaporated now. What's replaced it is something more complicated, a kind of suspended state. You're paying a significant portion of your income into someone else's asset, watching property prices do what they do. And somewhere at the back of your mind, there's this low hum of uncertainty about where all of this eventually lands. Not panic. Most people aren't panicking. It's more like a sustained low-grade unease that you've just learned to live alongside, the way you learn to live with a drafty window or a neighbor who plays music until midnight. The financial reality is worth naming clearly, though, because clarity is actually one of the more useful things available to us right now. In most Australian capital cities, a household renting a modest home is spending somewhere between 35 and 50% of their take-home income on rent alone. That's before groceries, before the power bill that arrived looking like a small loan, before the car registration or the gap on the dental appointment or the quiet creep of everything that used to feel manageable. And when that much income is committed before the month even begins, the space for building anything, it narrows. Not impossibly, but noticeably. Here's where people often get stuck, though. There's a kind of paralysis that settles in when the numbers feel this tight. A sense that because you can't do the big thing, buying a home, building equity in the traditional sense, there's nothing meaningful to do at all. And that's where the actual financial damage happens. Not in the rent itself, but in the inaction that the rent seems to justify. Because the market in 2026, for all its pressures, has also created something quietly useful for people who are paying attention. Interest rates have shifted. The investment landscape for ordinary Australians has actually become more accessible in some genuine ways. And the psychological shift that comes from redirecting even a modest amount each month, not into a deposit that feels permanently out of reach, but into a low-cost index fund or a properly structured emergency buffer or methodical debt reduction. That shift is real and it compounds. There's something almost counterintuitive about it. You're renting, which the culture has long coded as losing, and yet you're building, slowly, quietly, in the background, the way most things that actually last get built. Not in one dramatic moment of property settlement, but in the accumulated weight of small, consistent decisions made in months when it would have been easier to just let it slide. The freedom question is trickier, though, and it deserves honesty. Owning property in Australia still carries a specific kind of security that renting cannot fully replicate. Stability of tenure, the ability to make a space genuinely yours, the knowledge that your housing costs are at some point finished. Those things are real, and the cultural gravity around home ownership here isn't just mythology. For a lot of Australians, it represents a foundation. And navigating 2026 without acknowledging that pulling away from that foundation creates genuine difficulty would be dishonest. But freedom has never been a single thing. And the version of freedom that gets sold alongside home ownership, the idea that once you've signed the mortgage, everything relaxes, that hasn't aged especially well either. A lot of people who bought in the last 4 years at peak valuations are carrying a weight of their own, a different shape of pressure, stretched thin in a different direction. Maybe what 2026 is actually asking of us is a more honest accounting of what freedom means in practical terms. Not the aspirational postcard version, the lived version, the one where freedom looks like having 3 months of expenses sitting somewhere calm and accessible, where it looks like not having a credit card balance that quietly follows you from year to year, where it looks like your monthly commitments being low enough that a difficult conversation with your employer or a decision to change careers or a period of caring for someone you love doesn't immediately become a financial emergency. That kind of freedom is buildable from inside a rental right now. Even in this market, it doesn't require waiting for the deposit. It doesn't require the property settlement or the perfect moment or the market correction that may or may not arrive in any useful time frame. It requires something that sounds almost too simple, which is why it tends to get dismissed. It requires deciding that the financial life worth building is the one you can actually start today, with what you actually have, rather than the one that begins after some future threshold that keeps moving. The Woolworths run that always costs more than expected. The public transport commute where you do the mental arithmetic for the 15th time. The evening where you and someone you live with sit at the kitchen table with a laptop open and try to make the numbers make sense. These aren't signs that you failed at something. They're just the texture of this particular moment in Australian life. And a lot of people are sitting at that same table. What tends to change things isn't a windfall or a sudden reversal of the market. It's the decision, made quietly on an ordinary evening, to stop waiting for the conditions to improve before behaving like someone building something. To put $100 into an index fund when the algorithm says you can't afford to. To pay an extra $50 off the card when the card balance has been the same for 8 months. To build the emergency buffer that means the next unexpected thing doesn't undo the last 6 months of effort. Small, consistent, almost boring, and somehow, over time, that's the thing that actually starts to feel like freedom. The rental market in 2026 is not going to be solved by any individual reframe. The structural pressures are real, and the policy responses have been slow, and the experience of housing insecurity carries a genuine human cost that shouldn't be minimized. But within that reality, within the actual life you're living right now, there is more agency than the Sunday night scroll tends to suggest. It's just quieter than we expected freedom to be. Less arrival, more accumulation. Less a moment and more a direction. If something in this conversation has given you a slightly calmer way to think about where you are financially right now, even in a market that doesn't feel especially calm, that's probably enough for tonight.